Here's your host, Alex Garrett.
Well, it's Saturday, and we keep this Alex Garrett Podcast Network engine going as much as a truck driver revs up his engine every day, right? And it is Truck Drivers Day. And who do I turn to but the guy that I know has the most knowledge about trucking because he's in the trucking industry. You know him as my buddy Zach Miller. You know him as my colleague Zach Miller as well in the radio world. But Zach, you're my guest again. Welcome back, sir.
Oh, it's good to be back, Alex. This feels right. Feels like we're back to normal here.
Now, we were going to do like a beer podcast, beers and a podcast, maybe one day. But for now, this was more urgent because there's a lot in the trucking world, which I was not in tune with until I opened up my Gothamist email. And truckers might be having a heavy price to pay for their overweight trucks. But first of all, Truck Drivers Day, I know you didn't know this was today, but I looked on the international days and observances. Here it is.
Yeah, it's cool. I guess it's like International Truck Driver Day. I know that, the National Truck Driver Appreciation Day is in October. I know Truck Driver Appreciation Week, I think, is either in October or late September. But, it's the cool thing about trucking is it's not a national industry. It is global. Here in the U.S., obviously, we have cross-border freight between us, Canada, and Mexico. And it's really cool that internationally there's a day of recognition for our hardworking men and women who drive trucks and deliver all the goods and services that society requires.
All right, I know I always hit you with the news, but we got to clarify, you're not yourself a truck driver. So how does one
No, I am not.
who's not a truck driver get himself involved with the truck driving industry? Where did you get your start?
Well, it's a truck driver is just one job in the industry. The industry has various careers, drivers, of course, mechanics, technicians, dispatch, but there's so much office work. There's, accountants and lawyers like anything else. Management level positions. And I think 1 in 27 jobs in the state of New York is in the trucking industry. So it's a massive industry. The truck drivers are a critical component of it, but they are a component of it. I got involved because my father is a lawyer who works with the trucking industry. He is a traffic lawyer and his clients are trucking firms. And so I got involved working for him. That's how we met Alex, because we started a website, NewYorkTruckStop.com, and a radio show, New York Truck Stop Radio. I actually forgot the name of it for a second there. And I was on the board of the Trucking Association of New York for a while. And last October, I transitioned to a staff position with the Trucking Association of New York. I am the Director of Metro Region Operations. So advocating for the hardworking truck drivers is a full-time job for me, and I'm honored and privileged to have it.
And to be clear to the listeners, you're not advocating on behalf of them today or speaking on behalf of them. This is just you and I talking about the trucking world.
Yeah, exactly. Alex shot me a message and said, "Hey, it's International Truck Drivers Day. Let's talk about it." And I said, "Well, that's great. Always happy to talk about truck drivers and what we need to do to support them."
Well, last time we talked was around the convoy time, but do truckers post-pandemic, are they still feeling the hardships that they felt in pandemic? And also, is the supply chain, are they still is the supply chain easing up for them, or is it still a challenge there too?
Yeah, there's still a bunch of challenges, and I think it's due to the higher than expected inflation, because the freight rates have been down, and they've still been down, and we're seeing a lot of companies with their businesses down. It varies, but we're hearing as high as 30%. At the same time, though, there's still a lot of movement. Like the Port of New York and New Jersey became, over the last year, the busiest port in the country. So there's a whole lot of freight moving in this region, New York, but the Northeast region that the trucks are handling. So it really does depend a little bit on what type of freight the company hauls. There are challenges, and I think overall things are down, but they're not, they're not completely shut down, and it's not devastating. And you hear things like Yellow filing for bankruptcy, which is going to have an impact on the LTL industry. We're already starting to see that. So it's a very interesting time. I feel like every time you and I have these conversations, it's easy to frame it as good or bad. That's not really the case. It's just it's different, and there's challenges and there are also opportunities. There are companies that are going to pick up some of these loads and really build themselves up over the next coming years, and that's what this industry has always been about.
Well, legally with Yellow, I know it's been a really hard fight against the Teamsters, I guess. I don't know. But your father's not been involved with the Yellow
No,
Corp
no, no, no,
further,
no.
right?
He handles New York
Okay.
traffic violations. He does not get involved in,
But how does a
nationwide
99
labor
year
disputes.
how does a 99-year company, a trucking company like that, just all of a sudden file bankruptcy? What was leading up to that? Did you follow that
I mean,
closely? Or?
I think it's similar to, how does like a company like Sears go under or, start struggling? We've seen in this country long time companies struggle. And the story, usually there are a couple of different reasons for it. Bad management is always going to be at the top there, not really spending their money wisely. I know they had an acquisition that didn't quite pan out for them. I know that they kind of got squeezed by some of their competitors. They got that federal loan during COVID that probably they shouldn't have gotten. It's really a host of factors. I know their management would love to turn around and blame the Teamsters, but that's not necessarily reality. And there have been cases where, generally for smaller companies, there have been cases where labor and management contract disputes did lead to the closing of the company. So it has happened in this industry. I do not believe Yellow is one of them, though. I think Yellow can be tossed up to other factors, not because of labor.
And on that point, for those that may not appreciate the truck driving world as much, on Truck Drivers Day, we see them go to and fro, but I still don't think the idea that they do 14, 15-hour hauls, if you will, gets appreciated enough. Do you?
No, not at all. Not at all. And it really speaks to the fact that here in New York City, they don't have a place to park. I mean, nationwide, we have a truck parking crisis. There is only one truck parking spot for every 11 drivers on the road, which is really abhorrent. And that goes to it. They're federally regulated in terms of their hours that they can drive. So when it's time to pull over, when it's time to rest, they have to do it. They are federally mandated to do it. And one thing that I'm encouraged about is we're really starting to see some proactive movement, at least here in New York City and in New York State, about providing more spaces for our truck drivers to park and take their rest when they need to. So to really answer your question, I do think the appreciation is starting to get there, starting to get through. Now it's New York City. There's NIMBYism. There's costs of real estate. There are concerns that make it a challenge, but I'm glad to see people understanding the challenge and working towards solutions. And that shows to me that, yes, people are looking at their truck drivers a little bit differently with more respect and more appreciation.
Movies like The Bandit, Smokey and the Bandit, sort of portray these truck drivers as these tough, gritty, husky kind of guys and whatnot. But you get to talk to them. What is their morale like these days after the pandemic? Do you get to know them that well, or?
Well, there's really two types, right? I mean, there's a lot, but let's just break it down into two. There's your over the road truck drivers, which I think is more, they carry the image of Smokey and the Bandit, and then there's your local haulers. And the local ones are, yeah, they're frustrated. It's very challenging to operate in this city. It's very costly to operate in this city. They take great pride in the work that they do and the safe work that they do, but there are those frustrations as well. I think it's really more just about regulatory climate and actual space to operate more than pandemic. I think a lot have moved on from the pandemic, honestly, at least in what I'm hearing. The only time they bring it up, and rightfully so, is when they say, hey, we were out there during the pandemic. We were the ones that were essential, that kept everything moving. And it's frustrating for them then to turn back and constantly get hit with these ticketing and these regulations, and the fact that there's just less and less space for them to operate, which again, the city is addressing. They are looking at it. The city is not naive to that. DOT has done a great job of installing commercial loading zones throughout the city, including neighborhood loading zones in residential areas for that for those e-commerce deliveries. So there is a balance going on, and I think there's a mix of truck drivers that see that and are aware of it and are appreciative of it, and those that have their issues with the city and with operating in the city.
Well, I was going to say one of those issues has to be congestion pricing, right? I mean, there's some stuff going on with that. Are truckers noticing a hit with that?
Well, it hasn't gone into effect yet, so there hasn't been a hit yet. But yes, they are very, very, very aware of what it could mean, and are really actually starting to crunch the numbers of what that economic impact could be. But yeah, no local operator is going to get caught off guard when congestion pricing comes around. That's for sure.
Would you see the trucking industry pull like what New Jersey did, which is a whole lawsuit against the city of New York and state of New York? I mean, could that happen?
Well, I mean, the city already started to. Staten Island jumped into New Jersey's lawsuit. The crux of the lawsuit is that the MTA did not run their full environmental review. They ran a smaller assessment, and the lawsuit is to say the assessment was not sufficient. You need to run the full environmental review, or the environmental impact statement, I think is what it's technically called. So that's what that lawsuit is about. And I think there definitely were considerations that weren't met. So I think the point is pretty valid, especially when you look at the numbers that are still pre-COVID numbers. So it's sort of hard to formulate this projection moving forward when you're using faulty data. And so I'm curious to see how that lawsuit goes, how that lawsuit progresses. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge. We'll see. But yeah, so the borough of Staten Island already has signed on to that lawsuit.
While it is just you and I do want to know, since we've last talked, you've had a lot of career moves. How have those moves impacted your knowledge of the trucking industry? I mean, I feel like you're getting more of a knowledge now that you're in this, right?
Well, yeah, and the knowledge just comes from talking to more people throughout the day. I think we're getting calls from fleets of all different sizes, asking questions of, they're usually around a couple of the same topics, but I'm getting that different perspective. Not that I didn't have the fleet perspective before, but now you just get deeper into it and you spend all day. You really do have a better understanding of what type of freight is hauled and the challenges in hauling that freight in a place like New York City and the metropolitan area. So it's been a really great experience thus far, and excited to keep growing. You mentioned congestion pricing. That's going to be one that we're going to be very focused on, and I know you mentioned the BQE earlier. That's another one that we're going to be heavily focused on here.
Well, let's get to that. So there's going to be like an overweight truck ticket now. What's going on with this?
So basically, let me take a step back for a second, because it is a little tricky. The state has weight requirements based on the size of the vehicle. So it could go as high as 80,000 pounds, depending on the axle. So in a lot of cases, typically in construction, there are reasons to allow trucks to go over that weight. And they're issued permits called divisible load permits. So there are upstate permits and downstate permits. And New York City used to be included in downstate permits, and they froze it. But a company that had it was able to keep it and transfer it to another truck, when they replaced their truck with newer vehicles. But nobody else could get them. So it created a have and have not system in terms of companies that could apply for these divisible load permits for loads going, on New York City's highways. The challenge is, of course, those permits are still given in the surrounding counties. So Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, Orange, Dutchess, etc. So you have a system where companies are able to attain a divisible load permit in all these other areas in New York. And then once they get onto the New York City highway system, they are then deemed overweight. That's just one challenge. So that's one reason why people ask, well, why are there overweight trucks? That's one reason. Another reason is that, again, usually in construction, a truck will go to the job site and the job site will load the truck. And the truck then just has to go. The driver doesn't know how much the truck weighs. They want to assume that the contractor is doing right and loading the truck to the appropriate weight, but they don't always. There's a serious lackage of weigh stations in New York City. That goes to the parking shortage we talked about earlier. We don't have overnight parking. We don't really have weigh stations. That's a problem. So you have these trucks that they didn't load themselves. They are not sure how much they weigh. And then, lo and behold, they get on the highway system and they're pulled over for running overweight. Now, mind you, this is just citywide in general. This is not specific to the BQE or the Weigh in Motion program that's going into effect. But the larger vehicles, it did put wear and tear on the roads, and over time, the BQE is a rather old piece of infrastructure. It needs significant work, and so the overweight trucks are they're banned on the BQE anyway, the permit or not. They're not able to travel on those roads because the BQE needs to be repaired, and that's a whole other conversation. But to help with enforcement, they had this idea to do automated enforcement with it, which is the Weigh in Motion, which allegedly, we don't know how this works. I mean, if it really works or how it's all calibrated, but allegedly the truck will go over the sensor. And if based on the axle, if it's deemed to be overweight, there will be a camera that will take a picture of the license plate and send an overweight ticket to the company. The ticket's going to be $650 a pop. Now, there's a 90-day warning period. So the warning period went into effect on August 10th. The actual enforcement will begin on November 8th. So with this warning period, I would hope that any sort of problems with the system can get worked out, that fleets understand why maybe their truck was overweight. If it was overweight, if it's not, how do you contest it? But if it is, maybe they could understand why, and they could have conversations with the contractor if necessary, or they could reroute if necessary. We really don't know much about it. We hope to learn more over the next couple of weeks, and kind of go from there. But it's a first in the nation type of program. So how accurate is it? How well does it work? Who can say? We don't know right now.
Zach, I got to ask you this. Is this because we've talked about the whole progressive idea that they don't want cars or trucks on the road? This isn't one example of that targeting of vehicles in the sense of, hey, this truck is on the road. It shouldn't be on the road. We're going to punish that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if that's exactly what it is, because there is an understanding about how vital the BQE is as a freight corridor, and why, there's like 13,000 trucks a day on the BQE. And what DOT is saying, what they found since they've been practiced, I guess I'll use the word piloting, but it's really more playing around with these sensors over the last couple of years, is about 10% of the trucks are overweight. And look, from there, how many of them have the permits outside of New York City. We don't really know. It's kind of skewed data, but at least it's a starting point. So what we're talking about is at most 10% of those 13,000 trucks. So the majority of the truck traffic is still going to flow through the BQE. At least in terms of what we've been hearing, it really is targeting those overweight trucks that cause more wear and tear in the roadways. And I'll be honest, as they were looking at some of the weights on these trucks, we've seen trucks that are like grossly overweight. I think it was something like 174,000 pounds, which is utterly unacceptable. So it's not a straight up anti-vehicular type of program. I think that the goal of reducing overweight vehicles is an admirable one. My critique is the notion that this is the only tool in the toolbox. It is not. It could be a component. Enforcement is always going to be a component, whether
Sure.
that's automated or via officer. And given the constraints of the BQE itself, I do understand why, if they could efficiently do this with automated enforcement instead of having a cop pull over a truck on the side, there are reasons why it makes sense. It's just we don't quite know how it works yet, and that's where a lot of the sort of critique is in the unknown, and in the fact that if this is holistic, if it's, hey, and let's make sure we get the divisible load permit system back, and hey, let's make sure we have weigh stations, and the truck drivers know where those weigh stations are, and they're tied to parking and things that's like, okay, we're really working on the problem, in which case, I think we have something there.
All right. Well, I know that ticketing is kind of a thing that you and your dad talk about a lot, and the camera, the cameras are just all over the place. It feels like. Are truckers impacted by that? Now we could switch from overweight to just camera ticketing in general. Are truckers really affected by that, maybe more than other drivers, or how are you seeing it?
I'm not sure they'd be more than other drivers. I think a lot of the at least the speeding, I don't think those are really going to truck drivers. I mean, you really can't drive a truck all that fast in New York City, and nor should you. I think it's more passenger vehicles that are really getting hit with, at least with the speeding cameras. I know that truck drivers do have issue with the bus cameras, because a lot of times the truck can be in that lane to make the turn, and they're still getting tickets anyway. So for what I'm hearing is, when they fight them, they win, but it's still a real pain to get the ticket and take time to fight it, or hire someone like my dad to do it. There's a cost there. There's either a time cost or a financial cost to fight a ticket that you shouldn't have gotten. But that really is specific to the bus lanes. And that's why, honestly, we're really supportive of busways. Busway means that's what they have on 14th Street, for example, where a truck and a bus can be in that lane. They're legally allowed in that lane, and so there's not even a question. The truck is not going to get a ticket in a busway, and that's why
Zach,
we really prefer.
I think you should come down to 111 again and pull your hair out to see. Oh wow, that one lane, because there's still that one lane issue around the city that bothers me, and I know it bothers you too.
Yeah, is it like, you mean in general, or is there a specific spot? And believe me, I've got issues with both of them, but yeah, you need to have two lanes of traffic. You really do.
And remember, they said that was going to be after pandemic. That was going to be fixed up again. But obviously, those bike lanes are here to stay. So,
well, but the bike lane, it's the question to me is that it's not, bike lane, not bike lane, or anything like that. It's just when you put in a bike lane, you want to make sure that the bike lane is built safely and can keep the cyclists safe. And you want to sort of avoid any unnecessary conflict. So when you put a bike lane on a major thoroughfare, at the very least, you do have to make sure that there's more than one lane to travel for the vehicles to maneuver around each other and stay away from the bike lane. And then they occasionally they look to put bike lanes on truck routes in industrial zones. And it's like, listen, just as there are spaces in the city where your large trucks really shouldn't be, there are places in the city where you really don't want cyclists going. It's not a good mix for anybody. And I think the city needs to be a little bit more cognizant of that as they design the bike lane network, as well as the reevaluate the truck route network. I mean, these are really important networks for transportation here. And you have to look at it holistically, and you have to make sure that you're not causing unnecessary conflict with these road users, vulnerable or essential.
All right, I want to get away from the the whole trucking thing for a second, because we also talk city news. We talk about local stuff and things that drive both of us crazy. That's kind of how our bond is, right? And our friendship is. But could the trucking industry look at this migrant crisis and say, hey, you want to help us out? Is there a possibility that employment could be happening here?
I'm so glad you asked that. I really, really hope so. I really, really hope there is a pathway to careers for people to move through transportation and really move through trucking. And it does kind of circle back to truck driver appreciation, right? Our industry needs more truck drivers. We do. We have a shortage, and we also have a truck driver population that is on the older side. They're gearing up for retirement. So how great an opportunity it really is to have people who are in the country, who want to be here, who want to roll up their sleeves and work hard and live a life that they dreamed of. I'm sure they grew up hearing stories of the American dream, and it's like there's a pathway to do it here. And I think it's really something to be cognizant of, and to work with government agencies and educational institutions, particularly trade and tech institutions, to get people trained up and staffed up and move them into careers in transportation. I think eventually with the goal of getting a commercial driver's license.
You see a recent pilot program in, I think it was Southwest, is now suing former pilots for its training costs. Our trucking industry, they're not that cash up where they could start suing people that left the industry. Hey, we trained you for this. I mean, that won't happen, will it?
That is sort of beyond me, but I would hope not. I really, really would hope not. And I would hope that because there's such a need for the employment, I really hope that places that teach and train are not predatory in how they're doing it. Again, it's not the part of the industry that I'm most familiar with, but it is certainly an essential part of this industry. And I really hope that people who are interested are able to get the proper training and job placement that they're looking for.
All right, I know you've been around trucks forever, but come on, you see those big freights make that turnaround, like say a busy New York City street. That's still impressive to me. I'll always be in awe of that.
It's incredibly impressive. I mean, that's the thing. You got to remember, these are trained professionals. They have a special license. They have credentials. They do this every day, and that's not to say that they all do it perfectly. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they go down a place they shouldn't go, but the skill level is incredibly, incredibly high. And that's it. We've seen it. We've seen them make some turns and pull into tight spaces where you just have to stand there and clap, because it is almost impossible to do something like that. And yet they make the impossible happen every day.
One last thing, or a couple more things, but one thing that you talk about, the training and the skill set. I mean, we unfortunately have talked about law enforcement maybe not coming home because of the risky environment. Are truck drivers' families worried for their safety every day they're on the road?
I mean, I would. There are dangers, right? There are definitely dangers, and if you follow nationally, you follow trucker news nationally. If you're in a Facebook group or something like that, you do see that it happens more often than it should around the country, where you'll see a driver who gets into a crash and is not going home that night. So it is a horrible tragedy that happens, and I would imagine that that there might be some concern with the families. I can tell you this though, that there's also a lot of pride in the families, and they're proud that their spouse or parent or brother, child is doing something essential day in and day out, and keeping our economy moving, and keeping our communities well supplied. And for the first time this year, I went up to Syracuse for the truck driver championship. Every state association has their truck driver championships, and then they have the national championships. And my gosh, what a treat it was to see these drivers and how they operate, and how they value their safety, and how supportive their families are. It's cool. It's like a sports event, Alex, where you have the families come and they tailgate, and they're cheering on their loved one, and then they have a big awards banquet at the end of the night. It's really, really a wonderful and special experience. And so I have no doubt that there's always that sort of concern, but I think there's the pride outweighs the concern.
And that's why, we had a show called the Auto Lab, right? We always talk about the trade schools, and I would say this is no different. Trucking industry needs truckers, and the problem is, you know it, I know it, the rolling up their sleeves is not a concept in this generation before us, and so, or after us, I should say. So
I want to tell you a story, Alex, because this speaks to it. A couple of months ago, I was at a working group to discuss exactly this: more trades education, more driver's ed, education like that, getting people who may not be on a college track, or may not be on a college track right out of high school, getting them trained and placed in all sorts of technical careers that we are desperate for throughout the city. And there are, I was obviously there representing the trucking industry, and there are a couple of Teamsters shops there, as well as some other fleets. So it was a really good mix of people. And I was talking to a Teamster who got his son out of high school, or I guess maybe when he was 20, 21, whatever it was, got him a job, got him placed in the union, got him a job. This kid, I think he was 25, 26, was making like crazy money. I think it was $75,000 or $80,000 a year. I mean, just an incredible living. And he was telling me his son, he'd go out, he'd go to the clubs, because you're 26 years old and making $80,000. Yeah, of course you are. But, and he's in the union. He's on an outstanding financial track, what most people could only dream of. And he quit. Well, first he was arguing with his dad. He's like, my boss is so hard on me. And his dad goes, you understand the equipment that you're operating, right? Like, this isn't a joke. Like, what happens if you don't operate this properly? Like, he's hard on you to prevent that from happening. Also, you're 26 years old. He's trying to teach you so you become one of the best. And he's like, oh, he's too hard on me. So he quit to become a TikTok influencer. He's like, I see these kids and they make millions of dollars on TikTok. It doesn't look like they're working very hard. I want to do that. And his dad is just like, listen, I can't stop you from doing this. I just want to let you know how stupid this decision is. You're on a track right now where you will be able to buy a house with a very low mortgage, because your income is going to be so high in your 30s. And you're going to throw it all away for a lottery ticket, basically. But he wrapped up the story telling me that's kind of the mentality that a lot of his friends have. Now, I would never say that for a whole generation. I think that's ridiculous. People have different viewpoints within every generation. But that really stuck to me. And that is a concern moving forward, no doubt about it.
So this guy did indeed quit his job, is what I'm hearing, right?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
His Teamster's job.
That is mind-blowing, considering a lot of people got into the field for the benefits itself. I mean, the pension and all that.
Absolutely. And they're proud of it, and they should be proud of it. I mean, they'll tell you how, what their sort of income to debt ratio is. It's for most part, it's pretty outstanding. Many of us are quite envious of it, but you know what? They work hard and they earn it. And that's kind of the thing about trucking. It's very lucrative, but you have to work really hard. And I understand if people are like, well, I can make millions of dollars on YouTube or millions of dollars on TikTok. It's like, you kind of can't though. But you could only explain it so many times.
Zach, I know that you do different panels. So are you sort of public relations as well within the trucking industry, or what exactly is your role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of forward facing, doing media appearances, speaking at panels, that's part of it. That's part of what the association, or people who are in associations, is kind of what we have to do. And it's great because the thing is, the truck drivers are out there 6 days a week. The fleets operate 24/7. The people who do the hard work day in and day out, they're busy. They don't have the bandwidth to get out there and speak for themselves and explain how things work, to media or to government or to these great conferences. So it really is the role of the advocates to do that on their behalf. And so that's why I'm really proud to be able to do that for them.
Well, I know that you you feel very rewarded doing that. And it's an industry that like the back of your hand at this point, because you've been in it since you were a kid. How is Dad, by the way, for the audience that may remember you from those days in 1970?
Dad is doing great. He is it's funny because between some courts being open back to in person, but a lot of hearings also being done remotely, he is typically juggling court appearances via Zoom and via running to court in person. But yeah, I appreciate you asking about him. He's doing well, and I will let him know that you and I spoke and that you sent his best.
Well, one other thing, we kick around the transportation news of the day. Anything else alarming to you or worth noting while I have you here today on the Alex Guerra Podcast Network?
I wouldn't necessarily say alarming. I think that I think that if anything, it's a really fascinating time to be following this stuff, because we don't know how things are going to look in a decade. We don't know exactly what technologies are going to come to the forefront. One topic we didn't talk about today is a lot of the environmental regulations. A lot of the push to zero and near zero emission vehicles. So it's going to be a lot of change, a lot of things that we just don't know but need to be prepared for. So I think that what from where we're recording today, 2023 to 2033, I'm going to use the pun, buckle up, because it's going to be a very interesting ride here.
Well, you got to come back and we'll delve into that. Maybe do that beer and a podcast thing and review that, because as I mentioned earlier, the environmental regulations are, I hate to say, going to kill the industry, but they're going to kill. And you think yellow, I think other trucking agencies and trucking companies are going to go under through these regulations. I could be very dire here.
Well, it's certainly not going to kill. Like, the industry is very, very resilient and knows how to adapt. I think I am of the belief that it's never one thing that causes a company to go under. It is a series of things. Now, there will be like that sort of kill shot, so to speak, but companies that are prepared, companies that are well managed will,
and dare I say, adapt, right? We love to
adapt.
Say adapt.
Exactly. No, they will adapt. They will adapt and they will succeed. And our responsibility is to make sure they have the tools and the information to make those decisions. And to push back on some things that are onerous. It's one thing to have a goal in place, to have a massive increase in zero emission vehicles. It's another thing to put a year target on it when you don't know what the technology looks like. You don't know the capabilities. You don't even have an infrastructure grid set up. So, there are goals and there are goals, and to sort of put a mandate in place before things are ready is a problem. The thing itself, not necessarily the problem. And that's, the challenge that I think the industry is going to go through as they rush to meet unrealistic timelines, not necessarily unrealistic technological mandates, if you know what I mean.
I do. Well, we'll have to delve that into, and I'll have to listen back to that because I was a little worried, but I'll definitely check back on this podcast and listen and have some follow-up for you. But real quick, why, should we thank a trucker today on Truck Drivers Appreciation Day? And why should we thank a trucker to put a bow on all of this?
Well, here's the thing. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not homeless, you're not hungry, you're not naked, you have a trucker to thank for that.
That puts a bow on it, all right.
Zach Miller. I do want to just say, because Alex and I, we're recording this on Zoom. I understand most people aren't going to be able to see that, but right behind me is a certificate I got from then Mayor de Blasio for the Essential Workers Parade, thanking the essential workers. And I proudly display it on behalf of all the truck drivers who kept New York City afloat during the pandemic.
And what did you report to me what he said he said something out loud at the parade, didn't he?
So the t-shirt I was wearing, the back of the t-shirt had #ThankATrucker, and he pointed to me and he said, "Thank you, truckers." And I was just like, Bill de Blasio, all right. Didn't expect to hear that from you. That's awesome.
And not only that, you guys are in the Canyon of Heroes at the Essential Workers Parade. So there's that too.
That was a fun day.
That was great, and the plaque is there, so people have got to check it out right outside City Hall.
I got to check it out. I actually have to be at City Hall next week. I'm going to look for that.
All right, maybe we'll do a second episode while you're down here. Do a beers and a podcast. How cool would that be? Zach, congratulations on everything you've been up to since we last talked, and we'll do this again for sure.
Thanks, Alex. Always appreciate it.
Thanks always for joining the Alex Garrett Podcast Network.